everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Fundy Fridays. If you're new around these parts, my wife, the Reverend Jen, and I, well, on this channel we talk about things like American Christianity, conservative politics, pop culture, gay stuff, and the way all of those things seem to just bump into each other like the many charges and accusations facing Tim Ballard. And speaking of which, for those who don't know or remember, 1 year ago-ish, in July of last year, Tim Ballard's Sound of Freedom biopic came out with distribution from upstart Christian media service Angel Studios. This action thriller starring Jim Caviezel and based extremely loosely on the world of human trafficking and human trafficking prevention would go on to become Angel Studios' first ever box office smash, making over $200 million at the box office en route to a top 10 finish last year, despite some very shady business dealings into exactly, well, how that happened. And at least for last summer, it seemed like there was a chance for Tim Ballard to, off the wings of this movie, become a household name as a kind of hero in the world of anti-human trafficking work. And then a lot has happened since then, and that's not really Tim's trajectory at all anymore. So I figured today, about a year after Sound of Freedom, we would take time to explore what's been going on with Tim Ballard since then. But I have to say up front, there's some stuff I missed last time that I would like to try and cover in a little more detail. And particularly, I think I ignored some of Tim's incredibly deep and important connections into the world of the Latter-day Saints Church, the Mormon Church, and their home region, I guess you could call it, in the United States of Utah. See, Tim Ballard is a huge deal in Utah, like a huge, mega huge deal in Utah. And I just flat missed a lot of that when I was doing my first video. And I'm determined not to do that again. So with all that in mind, I decided that for this episode, I'm gonna call in the big guns. And I cashed in a Fundy Fridays favor with absolutely phenomenal ex-Mormon YouTubers and longtime bestest friends of the channel, Jordan and McKay. Jordan and McKay are going to help us out today with the very specifically Mormon and Utah-based parts of Tim Ballard's story. Now, Jordan and McKay aren't Mormon and don't live in Utah anymore, but they were Mormon and lived in Utah recently and are well aware of the culture of both of those worlds. Plus, they're just a lot of fun and they're super funny, so we are incredibly happy to have them here.
Cinema? Bro. Just say movie. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and I don't even say, I go to the cinema.
Let's go down to the cinema and we could pop by the pub first. Like, okay.
And I'll be honest with you all, a lot of this episode is me, Jordan, and McKay's Zoom call. We had such a good time and actually explained things a little better than I expected. So you're going to probably be seeing a lot more of me with them than you're going to be seeing me right here. But you will hear from me in the chair a little bit throughout the episode just to give some extra information or help guide the story along, maybe some things I missed. Fill those things in, stuff like that. It's going to be a bit of a chaotic episode, but that is in no small part due to the fact that Tim Ballard's life has been really chaotic since we last checked in with him. So all I can really say is fasten your seatbelts and be prepared for things to get a little chaotic moving forward. I swear, I think I'm going to get you the information you want to know, and I'm going to make it suck a little less. But overall, just know that this story is just kind of wild, and there's no real stopping that. In the meantime, though, let's go ahead and jump into my interview with Jordan and McKay, which will get us started, and I'll see you a little later on in the video. Today, you may notice that we have some guests with us, the lovely Jordan and McKay. Say hi, Jordan and McKay.
Hello.
They're going to be our Mormon experts today because it turns out there's a whole lot of Mormonism all over the Tim Ballard story, and I can't decipher much of that on my own at all. So they're going to help us out with that today, and we cannot thank them enough for being here and dealing with our nonsense and Tim's nonsense. I also want to do a couple of quick shout-outs to some other members of the Exmo community on YouTube. Kara Burrell, she provided significant assistance, some research she has done on Tim Ballard as well, along with the Mormon Stories podcast. Their work covering this was really important to me today too. So just wanted to shout out everybody in the lovely Exmo community. We're not a part of it, but we do get invited to some of the parties. Today we're going to be going through the story of Tim Ballard since last year. I'm kind of considering this the Sound of Freedom 1 year later. If you recall, last year on July 4th, they released the Sound of Freedom, the quote-unquote sort of stylized, heavily stylized biopic of Tim Ballard's life and work in, well, human trafficking, maybe sort of. We're not entirely sure sure, and that's what we're going to dig into today. I covered Sound of Freedom last year, along with some bits of the Tim Ballard story, but not a whole lot, and I wanted to circle back around and cover some things I didn't cover, as well as give you all the updates on both Tim, his media career, and how everything has shaped out since then. And of course, now that I have a couple of Mormon experts with me, we're going to have even more information to play around with. So I guess before I get started, and not to put you all on the spot, but Jordan, McKay, do you want to talk a little bit about the work you all have done following Tim, kind of some of the videos you all have put out? And do you have any comments to get us started, I suppose?
Well, we've kind of based a lot of what we started with Tim Ballard on with just vibes, if I'm being honest. Like years ago, we were like, this Tim guy seems pretty shady. This was at least as far back as 2021. And we're like, I don't know about this guy. He's kind of weird. Things are odd, but we didn't really want to talk about it too much because up until last year, really,
he's so beloved.
Was so beloved. And so we didn't want to catch heat for hating everybody's favorite cult of personality in the anti-child trafficking world. But that over time has evolved into doing live streams of reading one of his favorite books, Visions of Glory, as well as now kind of discussing the lawsuits that he's facing and the really grisly details of some of the interactions that he's had with former employees, volunteers, however you want to refer to them as.
He likes to keep that line blurry. And I think a lot of what you said is when you talk about feeling it out with vibes with Tim Ballard, for the longest time, that's all we really had. And that's what we've seen and what's been exposed, I think, is how much of a protection network and a propaganda shield this man had surrounding himself and all of his activities. There was not a lot of chatter about him until recently when everything exploded. So that's part of the reason the story's so interesting. And actually, what you're talking about kind of leads well into my first set of questions I had for you all specifically, because you all talked about trying to go a little bit easy on him in the beginning. And I'll say, even as early as last year, or as recent as last year, I struggled with that in my last video. I was probably a lot friendlier to Tim than I would be if I knew what I knew now, but it was because of that mystique that he had surrounding him. Now, I think a lot of the viewers of this video, this episode, will know about the anti-child trafficking mystique, that supposed work that he's done. Again, we're not really sure what he's done. But one thing I really didn't cover in my last video that I wish I had, and I think you all would be able to speak maybe to a little bit more. Tim Ballard is particularly well entrenched into the culture of both the Mormon Church, the LDS, and very particularly Utah. And that's something I didn't dig into very much in my last video. I know that's kind of a broad topic, but either one of you can start. But can you speak to maybe Tim's presence in Utah, the kind of figure he is, what you all noticed? I know you're not in Utah anymore, but what you all noticed when you were in Utah in regards to his persona and his presence in the media. Can you all comment on that for a little bit?
I mean, I had one personal experience just living in Utah. When I worked at a tire shop, one of his employees would actually come by and have us work on his vehicles, because he mostly handled like financial type stuff. He was mostly like booking flights and things like that.
We used to run, that was another thing, we used to run into a car that was wrapped in OUR when we were living in like northern Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. When you said you changed the tires on Tim Ballard's car, my brain immediately went to like a wrapped H3.
Oh,
like,
no,
like,
it was his employees'
I'm assuming you're
cars.
wheeling out monster truck tires for this thing. Like, I did not imagine him driving. Like, I can't imagine them bringing in his like Honda Accord. That doesn't feel very Tim Ballard.
Very fair.
Well, it wasn't Tim Ballard's Honda Accord. It was it was a Honda Accord, actually.
It does make me wonder why
his
To be fair, if you guess
cars.
a car, make, and model, and you guess Honda Accord, you have like a 50% chance of being right.
The culture of like, you see it, people wearing like shirts. Like, it would not be common for us to like go out somewhere and see somebody in like an OUR shirt or like some Sound of Freedom thing on a bumper sticker, or like, it is pervasive.
Yeah, all kinds of, I mean, it's more prevalent than the little marathon stickers. Everybody has the little OUR chain on their bumper, and even like our families and friends of people that live in Utah or in the Morador of like southeastern Idaho all the way down to Arizona, and even out here in Colorado, people like attending fundraisers and posting about OUR and kind of grassroots fundraising like that, even to the point where like a person from our ward growing up and my former boss who owns a Chick-fil-A franchise throwing fundraisers for OUR not too long ago. So
You
it's
can't escape it.
even with the enmeshment within the church and him speaking at church firesides and being invited to all these things, he was really kind of pedestalized, as we can see with his relationship with higher leadership within the church, that he really had kind of superstar status within at least the Mormon church here in the United States.
Yeah.
And that actually leads into kind of a follow-up question I had there. I particularly want to address Tim's relationship with two other people before we move on. One of them more important than the other, but I'm addressing them both because their names are confusing and their roles are similar. So if you all could very briefly, just for our non-Mormon audience, explain the difference between the prophet, Russell M. Nelson, and LDS president, M. Russell Ballard, no relation to Tim Ballard. Can you explain those two men's roles, like who's more important than the other, and more importantly, a little bit about how those two are connected to Tim?
So Russell M. Nelson is the prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The prophet and president is selected by those who are the most senior of the quorum of the 12 apostles. Now, it's kind of a misnomer because there are 15 apostles at any given time, the quorum of the 12, and the presidency that's made up by the prophet president and his two counselors. So whoever is the most senior when the current prophet dies is the one that is selected to be the next prophet, and he then selects his two counselors. So in 2018, Thomas Monson was the prophet, and he passed away, and then it fell to Russell M. Nelson, who is also very advanced in years. He's supposed to turn 100 this year, hopefully. When he was made the prophet, because he's the most senior, he then selects two counselors out of the other apostles, and he chose the next most senior after him, Dallin Oaks, to be one of those and another apostle, which then left the most senior position to be in charge, or the president of the quorum of the 12 apostles, to M. Russell Ballard, who has since passed away. But Ballard, no relation to Tim Ballard, which I thought was...
They're very serious.
I thought for a long time that they were connected, especially given their close relationship and all of that.
Well, and supposedly he may have invoked that himself too, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But it's that connection between Tim and M. Russell that has really kind of changed how things are playing out for Tim now, and specifically how he exploited that particular relationship. But I'll be perfectly honest, I spent 3 days walking around the house talking about the prophet, M. Russell Ballard, before Jen finally went, he's not the prophet, and then explained the whole thing, because she was aware that there was another one, and then she's like, he's not the prophet, he's the president or something, and we looked it up and realized that it's confusing on purpose. So
yeah, seriously.
One thing that came up a lot, and that we'll talk a little bit about a little later on, Tim was in position, or was at least in heavy consideration up until obviously relatively recently, for the retiring Mitt Romney's Senate seat.
We now know Mitt Romney is not going to run again. You live in Utah.
Yeah.
There's a seat that's going to be open.
Well, that's the very seat that I was asked to look at weeks ago. And I was very seriously considering it then.
And how about now?
And
this
now
is a lot easier.
I'll be honest, even more so. I'm very, very serious.
What gets you in?
My wife and prayer and just making sure.
So she says yes. When you go home, you're in.
That's how it's always worked in the past.
Okay.
I would guess, and I know you may not be experts or however you want to say it, but I am curious as people much closer to the situation than me. Before all of this happened, let's say like we step back in time 1 year to July of last year. How viable do you all think those Senate chances were for him?
It would have been no question.
Shoo-in.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to believe he might be fringe. I mean, the work was a little, it may not translate to politics. Some people might have, but you're saying that if he ran, he won, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I think it appeals in kind of if we look at it kind of from like the Trump ideology of like, he's not a politician and he cares about saving children. And that's what our country needs right now, is not another politician. And
especially after Mitt Romney scorned all of those that voted for him initially.
Yeah, Utah's very displeased with Romney in
Because-
general. But yeah, I don't think there would have been any question. He would have, I mean, he wouldn't have even, in my opinion, really had to campaign. Like, he is
Yeah.
so well received in Utah that it would have been like, oh, Tim's running. Yeah, like that's what we need right now because he's going to save the world.
Yeah, and especially with an endorsement from Sean Reyes and
The
personal
governor.
appearances with Donald Trump and all that, it's like it was a no-brainer. I don't
He
even
was
know
set
who
up
would have
win.
been running against him.
That leads very well into the last of these questions I have, which is, can you explain who Sean Reyes is and why he might be important to this story?
I'll let you.
You want me to talk about it?
Yeah.
Who
Okay, so
hates him
Sean Reyes-
more?
Sean Reyes is was the attorney general, and there's nothing really too interesting about him, but him and Timmy had enough of a relationship that Sean actually went on like a raid with Tim, and they formed like a friendship over like, oh, well, Sean is going out there and getting perspective on what's happening in human trafficking because that's somehow important to his role as attorney general of Utah.
Yeah.
And so they had a relationship that kind of blossomed from there, and then that connection remained pretty solid up until recently.
You have been with Tim on raids. You have planned them with him, and you go back even further with him in government. And so talk a little bit about your relationship. I think it's important for people to understand this, who Tim is, because there have been a number of stories, right, casting doubt on his tactics or going after him on a variety of different things. And I want people to understand, I love what you said there. You just said, this is true. You know Tim, you've been involved in this. So talk a little bit about the roots of that relationship.
Sure. Tim Ballard is a hero. No other way to characterize him. If anybody doubts either his experience or his credibility, again, that's coming from a point of absolute ignorance. He left our task force in the state of Utah in 2013 and our ICAC team, Internet Crimes Against Children, to go out on his own, start this NGO called Operation Underground Railroad. We went to Colombia, effectuated a highly successful operation. We didn't tell anybody. That wasn't our purpose to try to promote it. We were trying to help the nation of Colombia and law enforcement.
Good to know. And I actually asked that because Mr. Reyes is going to be coming up a couple times in our story here today. So that is not the last you've heard of Attorney General Sean Reyes from Utah.
Yeah.
And as I recall, I think he's not running again, but he is still in office, I believe, from what I read, until 2025. Like he
Something
leaves
like that. Yeah.
He's basically
Yeah.
like he's out in January. He's going to run out his term, but then he's done. So, and I just wanted to highlight all of this in part because there is an alternate timeline where some very brave people didn't stand up against Tim Ballard and he would be on the fast track to becoming a senator. So that's part of the reason we're talking about all of this today, is because this was almost Senator Ballard. And I think now we might have dodged that fate at least. Can you all tell me a little bit, and I'm saying all of this as someone who interacted with it only insofar as I did this research, and even then was still very, very confused. Can you all explain for our audience what Visions of Glory is and how it plays a little bit of a part in, or maybe not so little of a part in, Tim Ballard's story up to this point?
Are you looking for Visions of Glory? Confetti Antiques and Books has Visions of Glory by John Pontius. Hard to find. In fact, it's been sold out 3 times since its debut in November 2012. Regular price is $17.99. Buy 10 or more and pick them up for $11.50. That's a 36% savings. Visions of Glory recounts the amazing near-death experiences and subsequent visions of Spencer, as told to author John Pontius. Pick up your copy today. Sold exclusively at Confetti Antiques and Books.
This is a thorn in my side, but Jordan is the one who has read it more than once at this point now. So
Yes.
Two very different kinds of expertise here.
Yes. Because I read it while I was still Mormon. So Visions of Glory is a book. It was written by a guy who allegedly had like visions, basically is how he described them, of like heavenly things, Mormon-y things that were happening. So he wrote this book about his experience while he's had like these like crazy health episodes and near-death experiences where he was like revealed Mormon scenarios. Now these scenarios seemed futuristic in nature, and they were kind of woven in with Mormon doctrine. And so when it came out and people started reading it, there were some people who started to take these things like very seriously and started to potentially see them as like foretellings of things to come. And so it was sold in the church bookstore. It was like, which is like a really big deal. So it almost seemed like the church condoned it.
I did, not to interrupt you, but I just want to highlight, because I don't think a lot of people like in our audience may realize what it means to be like a church bookstore, like just any other regular Christian denomination. That's one thing. A Mormon bookstore, to get into a Mormon bookstore, you have to be signed off on.
Yeah.
There are people high in the church with official power who vet those types of things. There is not going to be, Deseret Books is not going to carry something that the Mormon higher-ups don't know about. So we can assume that if this book was sitting on those shelves, that it was at least, I mean, I'm not saying it's Mormon canon necessarily, but it was accepted as a reasonable additional bit of literature to your Mormon studies.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And this, just to be clear, this is a bookstore that is the only other authorized retailer to sell garments and temple ceremonial clothing, other than the distribution services branch stores in across the world. So,
well, and additionally, allegedly, the author of this book had told his visions to an apostle. He would not say who, because that would have potentially thrown this apostle under the bus. But he allegedly told this apostle about his experiences, and the apostle was like, you need to write about it. You need to tell people. Because he was like, do I share these experiences? Because what if what if people do XYZ? And this apostle was like, no, write it. And so everybody was like, oh, well, there was an apostle who condoned this. So it's kind of like the church is like secretly telling us that these things are going to happen without like outright saying it. But there is some bonkers stuff in there. Like some very weird, like, yes, it's like foundation, like there's Mormon doctrine. I wouldn't even say it's foundational. Like there's some Mormon doctrine kind of woven throughout, but overall it is very bizarre. Like experiences where all of the dead prophets are going to come back to the counseling or the conference center in Salt Lake City and have a meeting. So like they're, Joseph Smith all the way to current are going to stand there in the conference center and announce themselves. And then Jesus himself is going to show up. And so like very bizarre things and very calamitous, like very weird. There's like patriotism in there too. So overall, it is so chaotic.
And I noticed too, because I watched your all's commentary about it, I want to highlight to everyone that Jordan and McKay have an excellent video, and I believe there's even a series. You dig in, I'll do it a little bit harder than that.
Yeah, we did streams.
But Jordan and McKay have an excellent series of streams and videos you can watch to really dig into Visions of Glory and how loop-de-loop it is. But I did want to highlight, and I know that one theme I saw really emerging in the videos you all made that I watched is the idea that Visions of Glory is a book that, for lack of better phrasing, if one is prone to megalomania, it might maybe lead someone to accelerate their megalomania a little bit.
Yes. I don't know. I believe this book to be kind of a catalyst. If you are a person who reads this and takes it for face value, there has been people like Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, who are in
Lori was
prison.
Allegedly reading it when she was arrested.
Not alleged. Well, the book was there.
Yeah.
At the poolside in Hawaii. So I would guess that she was probably doing a little light reading before she was hauled off to the clink. But they're both in prison. Chad Daybell is now awaiting the death penalty.
Jody
Hildebrandt also in prison
for child abuse
for 25 years or something like that, whatever the maximum is.
Also a reader of Visions of Glory.
Yep. And
friends with the author, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And now we have Tim Ballard, who is facing multiple lawsuits on charges of sexual misconduct. But I mean, even wasn't that one, I think it was last year, there was a family that abducted their children because the mom and her husband were like total weirdos and bugged out from Arizona up to Idaho because apparently the world was going to end.
Like if you are prone to like that extremism prepping kind of lifestyle, this is like their bread and butter. Like this is like, oh, the end of times is coming and we have to prepare.
Yeah. Because I mean, when you look at within Mormonism, it is kind of in line with kind of the mainline Christian perspective of what is to come before the returning of Jesus and the whole wars and rumors of wars and calamitous events and natural disasters. And I guess in a lot of senses, that's where the descriptions end. So I can see where the craving for more detailed depictions of what might come to pass or whatever can sway these people kind of into a frenzy.
When I could see Tim seeing this and
Yeah.
going, oh, look at all the attention. Because this guy like wrote under a pseudonym. So nobody knows who he actually was, but people figured it out.
Yeah.
But people hold this author in such high esteem. I can see Tim reading it and being like, oh, I can do visions. Like I can see things like that and get people to like me even more.
Thank you all for explaining that, because that is something that where I guess, like you mentioned, McKay, it seems like the Mormon church and the more mainstream mainline Christian churches in the US tend to agree on a lot of things. Visions of Glory is kind of trying to plant its stake in a more fringe version of Mormonism.
Yeah.
And so I probably don't have to explain why that would be concerning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really funny that it would be carried by the church bookstore, and apparently nobody proofread it, because from the first little bit you could be like, this is 100% as per Mormon gospel. This is apostasy. People would not have visions like that. And for a apostle who we suspect to be Mark Peterson, who has passed away a long time ago already, to like put his stamp of approval on this, and then the church bookstore picking up at it, it's just really strange behavior. And I don't know. It's just a lot.
Weird.
All right, so the first of my check-ins, and I specifically wanted to take this moment to talk to you all directly about the Gardy Mardy situation. The Gardy Mardy situation is a significant, I mean like core piece of the Tim Ballard lore and backstory. He built a lot of the early mystique around himself and OUR based on this story in particular. And likewise, we're going to kind of be taking this story apart today. So I really want everyone to understand exactly what happened, what's going on, and what I'm talking about. So, Gardy Mardy was a young boy born in Haiti in 2007. However, he tragically disappeared in 2009, and his family thoroughly believes that he was kidnapped in some capacity. Even more tragic, Gardy disappeared in December of 2009, only a couple of weeks before the massive earthquake that hit that country in early 2010, costing thousands of lives and making the search for Gardy himself nearly impossible at that point. But that doesn't mean his father, Gesno Mardy, stopped trying, and reportedly he would simply wander as far as he could out and into his village with a flashlight, shouting Gardy's name and just hoping that his son heard him or that he heard his son's cries. Now, Tim Ballard comes a little bit later on in this story in 2010, specifically while Tim was working in Haiti as a federal agent. Tim reportedly heard from Gesno the story of Gardy's disappearance and was so moved that he promised to find Gardy and return him to the Mardy family. And furthermore, this was reportedly the impetus for Tim quitting his job with the government and going on to found Operation Underground Railroad.
That first happened, I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't even get into my house and sleep, because as a father, my job is, getting my son back. I feel that it is my duty, it is, my responsibility to get him back. And I will not let go.
When I first met Gesno, I asked him what was being done to find his son. And he answered my question with a question I wasn't expecting. He said, "Do you have children?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Could you sleep at night knowing that one of your children's beds was empty and you not knowing where they were?" And I said, "Of course not." And he said, "Well, that's been my reality. The only thing being done is I walk the streets at night. I work all day, and then I walk the streets at night, arbitrarily picking some neighborhood. The more crime-ridden, the better. The darker, the better. Flashlight in hand, and I pray to God that I'll hear my son cry. And that's what's being done to find him." And it was in that moment that I said, there's so much more we can do, and I promise you, I will never stop. Until I die, I will never stop looking for your son.
I really cannot stress enough, the whole story of Tim Ballard is based on this Gardy Mardy situation. It really is vital to understanding him, and without it, he's probably nothing. Now, the thing is, Gardy Mardy has still never been found, and today he would be 17 if he was located. Now, despite this massive failure in keeping his promise to the Mardy family, Tim likes to assert that as many as 28 other children may have been saved in the process of looking for Gardy, though it's Tim Ballard, so these claims are dubious at best.
Gardy's been moved around quite a bit, but everywhere we go looking for him, we end up rescuing more children, taking us into places we never would have gone otherwise. We haven't found him yet, but we are closer than ever. We are putting more resources into this investigation than ever, and we're gonna find him, and we're gonna find him really soon.
And likewise, all of this failure hasn't stopped Tim or OUR from directly trying to profit off the Gardy Mardy story for themselves, even as late as December of 2023.
You know the story from a previous episode of how we found our kids and adopted them, but there's more to the story. Because what brought us down to Haiti in the first place that led us to our children? And that was the story of this little boy. 2 years old, Gardy Mardy, U.S. citizen, born in the United States to Haitian parents, and then they moved back to Haiti, where his father was the ecclesiastical leader of his church. And this little boy was kidnapped.
And these children are voiceless. They have no voice, but God hears them. He's sending people to rescue, and we just need to find out what more he is asking us to do. Like in this moment, what is he asking us to do? To go find those voiceless children and women and all the people that are suffering. There's so much suffering, and we need to be listening so that we can be that tool to find the voiceless.
And there's so many ways to do it. You know, you can donate to those who are out doing the work right now. In fact, I sit on the board of Aerial Recovery, and they're in the middle of an operation right now. OUR continues to do operations. Covenant Rescue. There's so many that we are trying to support.
So yeah, really gross, really exploitative, and really central to Tim's lore. And now, once you hear about some of the developments that have come out about the Gardy Mardy situation, I hope it'll make a lot more sense to you. But anyway, back to Jordan and McKay. And the third thing I wanted to talk about, which I know you all may not be quite as engaged with, but you have mentioned in your videos before and is a big part of the lore that I just straight up missed, the deception of Gardy Mardy and his family. So just to give a recap, I won't make you all do this. Back in around, I believe it was 2009, Tim met a man by the name of Gesno Mardy in Haiti and had discovered that Gesno's son Gardy had been kidnapped in 2002, which had been about 7 years prior to when they first met. But I wanted to highlight all of this because there was one article I missed very much in particular from Anna Merlin and Tim Marchman from Vice, who've done an incredible amount of work on the whole Tim Ballard situation going back years. I think you all can probably agree, if you research Tim Ballard at all, at some point you're going to bump into these two journalists.
Yep.
I think that's what we were reading in 2021.
Yeah, their work is kind of like, I would call it the foundation of everything we know about Tim right now. And yeah, I missed this article that you all caught. I straight up missed this one, which discussed this and how a lot of the Gardy Mardy story and Tim's years and years of attempting to find this child, who at this time I believe would now be 17, if my math is correct. That article referenced, and I want to bring this up because she'll be coming up later, that almost all of Tim's leads on this case came from a psychic who at the time was only known as Janet. Now, I'm just letting you all know right now, Janet is going to be coming back up in our story. She's kind of a big deal. But this has been known for a couple of years, and it really throws the entire Tim Ballard lore on its ear, because the Haiti story, him backing out of his job, him going to rescue the kids there, it's the foundation for Sound of Freedom. It was the foundation for Operation Toussaint, which was their free documentary online. I'm not watching that because it's gross and I don't want to give him any more money or time or attention, but it's the foundation of a lot of the Tim Ballard story. And if we call the Haiti story into question, the whole Tim Ballard House of Cards kind of falls apart. So I want to mention that even as far back in 2021, people were doing that. People were engaging with and addressing this part of his story. Well, now that kind of brings us up to the modern day. So now I figured we'd kind of just have some fun going through everything that's happened since I put out my video last year, which was August of 2023. I'm not doing anything before that because you should go watch my other video. So we'll be starting in September of 2023. And at least from my research at the time, it seems like at that point, Tim was still trying to pretend everything wasn't happening. I know that in my last episode here on the channel covering Mike Rowe from the Discovery Channel, they actually interviewed in September of 2023, and from my time listening to that, they were acting as if all of this was just going to go away, and that Tim was an obviously innocent and beleaguered party by a bunch of outside forces that hated him because they hated children or something.
What in the world happened with this movie to make so many people go, there's no, la la la, nothing to see here?
Well, I think I have the answer. I'm still figuring it out because it's so bizarre. But I do think I have a pretty good answer so far as to what's happening. I've been accused of being everything from a trafficker to a pedophile to an adulterer to you name it. You know, my kid cries home, calling home. Did Dad leave you, Mom? Because my friend says all over the news that Dad has a girlfriend. And what's interesting is all the media outlets that are reporting these lies. Back in 2014, when we did the operation, whether it's the Guardian, Rolling Stone, CNN, they all said glowing things. And yet something changed. It wasn't the story, it was the media. So why? And this is what I think. I think they do not want to have the conversation about, for example, 85,000 children missing in the United States. They don't want to have a conversation about why there's an agenda out there to provide what really is pornography to children in the name of sex education. And they know that Sound of Freedom is going to force the conversation down their throat. And so they have to dissuade people from going. But the problem is it had the opposite effect. I think they only helped. Because the more they lied, and then people would go and come back and say, there's nothing QAnon, there's nothing political. Well, who's hiding what? I think it helped drive ticket sales. But more importantly, I think a line's been drawn in the sand, and there's more good people in the world than I dreamed that there were. And I have hope for the first time that we can actually make a difference.
Now, all that being said, I do think that the first real development of the Tim Ballard story post August of last year, Sound of Freedom, hubbub, all of that, came from the aforementioned Anna Merlin at Vice News. An in-depth profile of Janet, the psychic who supposedly knew where this missing child was, now known by her full name, Janet Roussan. And this is someone I want to talk to you all about because I know you have covered Janet a little bit, and I think you all might be able to tell this story a little bit more interestingly than I will. So can you tell our fans a little bit more about Janet Roussan and how she plays into the Tim Ballard story?
Janet Roussan was the aspect of this whole situation that I could have never in a million billion years have predicted would come up. Because Janet, the idea of what she does for Tim
and allegedly Russell
and
Ballard
others is completely incompatible with modern day Mormonism. Maybe when Joseph Smith was around, this kind of thing,
when
because Joseph Smith was doing kind of the same shit, right?
They were letting all the weird stuff slide back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
They hadn't figured out what they were going to keep and throw out yet.
Yeah, if you want to go down a really strange rabbit hole, you should see what they did with the box that they carried, what people did with the box that they carried Joseph Smith's body home from Carthage in. It kind of takes a D&D, takes a little bit of a D&D turn.
Hey, everybody, James in editing here. So I went ahead and did what McKay said and looked up what they did with Joseph Smith's casket after he was martyred, quote unquote. And yeah, it's weird. Turned it into a bunch of canes. They turned it into a bunch of like walking canes. And then gave them out to a bunch of like high-ranking other Mormons, and some of them are like in museums and like official like sites of the LDS Church. But yeah, so there's like walking sticks out and about there made of the wood from Joseph Smith's coffin. And I just wanted to tell you that because I think it's really odd. But to be fair, it's also pretty Mormon.
But anyway, the idea of fortune telling, of I don't even know what else to describe it as, is expressly in the handbook discouraged by all members. No fortune telling, no astrology or horoscopes or anything like that. Those are seen as negative influences, mainly because it goes against the theology that is established, where you cannot receive any sort of revelation or anything that pertains directly to you from anyone that is not yourself, within your family, or somehow connected to you on that level, or like an apostle or something like that.
So her involvement was really surprising and I think we're only just now getting, like you're saying now, the full picture of it, because I think they damn well knew that if the public knew about this would make people be like, that's not a thing that we're allowed to do. But Tim is like besties with church leadership. So is it something that we're allowed to do? Like, why do the apostles need a psychic? But like, if I go to an astrologer, like, I'm in trouble with my bishop.
Yeah.
But we didn't know anything about her. So this is super fascinating because she's largely just been this obscure person that we know really nothing about. But she's been involved, like you said, since the whole beginning of all of this. But it's also like, I mean, she's allegedly a psychic, but like also what is happening, because she's been involved with this whole Gardy Mardy situation and they still don't have that kid.
Well, and I know that you mentioned that it's expressly, first of all, she's been wrong for 17 years, and she's given them reportedly hundreds of predictions that just seem to go nowhere.
It seems like Tim could benefit from reading what Joseph Smith was doing before the gold plates, because that is exactly what Joseph Smith would do. He would string people along saying that he had mystical powers, and then it was just a scam in the end. They would be looking for treasure on their property and be like, oh, sorry, the ground became slippery and now there's an angel protecting it. It can't get to it. So it sounds like she's doing the same thing.
But that was something, and you mentioned how it's forbidden to risk, like, psychic knowledge from the other world or whatever is relatively forbidden in Mormonism. And I know that there's been some discussion based on all of these different exposés about her, of which there've been a few, and we'll discuss some of that later on. But
exposés, you mean smear campaigns?
Tomato. It's both if it's true, because I know that she's done kind of the shitty boyfriend thing where she picks parts of the argument that she knows she can win and goes after them. She would say things like there were discussions that she was directly talking to Nephi, who I don't know exactly who Nephi is. She would argue up, down, left, and right. She wasn't directly talking to Nephi, but it sounds like, based on what you're telling me, that it doesn't really matter.
This is your reading from Nephi. Tell me about my new position as CEO again at OUR. How is it right? How will it improve things? How or what counsel things do I need to do? Nephi says, are aware the timing of this move is correct and timely. We've timed it. You're never alone in these endeavors, Tim. You're always accompanied by angels, helpers, heavenly help. You know this. It's the rhythm of life. That love increasing as faith in action produces works and rewards from the divine or deity, not always directly from God, but other heavenly beings as well. A seer stone might be the next level, a personal revelatory device. A visitation may be added to or in place of a stone. So Elder Maxwell then gives the microphone to Nephi. Becoming CEO at this point was always the plan, and because you followed the plan almost perfectly enough, you are able to step in without tripping. It is right because we say it is. You are always meant to be at the helm of OUR.
It sounds like no matter what otherworldly presence she thought, even if it was just she thought she had an extremely strong intuition or something, she was kind of treading into some forces that were not appreciated or accepted by mainstream Mormonism.
No. And to imply that she was able to supply any sort of services that would be like useful in the real world that a prophet couldn't, really kind of undermines the idea of the prophet, seer, and revelator position that all the apostles have.
Me again. So I want to highlight before we go into this section that I don't have too much evidence for this, but I have this gut feeling that Tim Ballard really, really doesn't want to be connected with Janet Roussan in any way. And it's really hard to find formal links or information about the relationship between the two. I mean, shoot, the picture I showed from Vice News earlier, as far as I know, is the only picture I've ever seen of the two of them together, Tim and Janet. Or at least up until recently, it was the only picture of the two of them I'd seen. However, things have changed a little bit. And so now this is actually the fun part. If y'all know this already, it's not going to be as fun, but I think we'll still have fun because I've done some research onto this, and I think I might have some information, I don't know if you all know yet, about Janet Roussan, which is I discovered she came to Tim Ballard through an organization called Children Need Families. Have you ever heard of this organization before?
No.
Okay, this is fun. Children Need Families was Catherine Ballard's adoption-based OUR subsidiary charity. It was a charity operated underneath OUR. It was a formal branch of OUR, and it tapped into their fundraising. And it was an adoption service.
Hey guys, I'm here with my wife, Catherine. We're here at home with all of our kids, and I just want to give you a message from Operation Underground Railroad and from the Nazarene Fund that although the quarantines are happening, and of course, we're all taking precautions, our work is continuing to move forward. You've seen in the news how the solution to this current corona problem is largely based in the private-public partnership model. And that's the model that OUR has been using since the day we were born. As many of you know, we have a project called CNF, Children Need Families, that my wife Catherine founded. That now is officially a project of Operation Underground Railroad, and we have some good news on that front. We've been working a lot this week on CNF, and Catherine's going to tell you what we're doing on that front right now.
Oh, we're just really excited. We have about 100 kids that are ready and waiting to be placed, and families that are willing to open their homes and their hearts, and we just need donations to help people. Adoption can be really expensive, and with your help, we can bring these children home to safe, loving environments.
Adoption is expensive. They would give you loans to go through it. They did not place the kids necessarily. They didn't have kids to be placed. They were very particular about that. I'll be throwing a bunch of documents up here because I way backed their old website, and they left a little up there that they ought not to have. But here's the fun part. So I'm going to ask you all a question. We all make YouTube videos. We have, we do a lot with YouTube. You all know if you unlist a video, most people aren't supposed to be able to see it, right?
Yes.
Did you all know that if an unlisted video is added to a playlist, that rule no longer applies? It will show up in a playlist. Any unlisted video.
Oh, I did know that. I did it
Really?
I did it on Monday
that.
for.
And I say that, I just jumped my gun. I'm going to share my screen with you all real quick. We're going to have some fun.
Oh, I'm ready for this.
So do you all see Children Need Families?
Yes.
Oh,
this,
no content.
No content, you would think, except this.
Oh my God, it's right there.
I will admit, I can't remember exactly who the creator was. I saw this video in the background of somebody else's video and traced it down. But this video, which I will be clicking on right now, is unlisted. This was an attempt to take this down. They don't want you to see this. But notice the date this was posted, March 27th, 2019. Now, I'm going to play this clip for us, and I want you all to see if you can spot a certain psychic friend of ours.
Oh my God.
A little cold open action.
Do you recognize that face?
Oh my God.
3 people
She's the one who
appeared
called
to...
us fat
no,
without
4
calling
if you
us
count
fat.
their sound guy. So we now have evidence to at least 2019 of his involvement with Janet Roussan in this capacity as well. And I'll cut this off because they show a lot of kids later. And I don't want to be blurring everybody. So yeah, I just want to reiterate, as far as I can tell, at least right now, it seems like this video, this unlisted video is only the second piece of true evidence we have of Tim and Janet interacting with each other, and in some sort of official nonprofit capacity even. And once again, I'm just kind of proud of having found it. So thank you for taking this little detour with me. But yeah, so that was my fun fact for the day, and I'm going to tell it to all of our friends who don't do YouTube but might upload a video every now and then. If you unlist a video and it gets added to a playlist, it still shows up. And as far as I can tell, that's if anybody adds it to a playlist, because I also found a link to this from somebody's Pinterest. So,
long story short, private your videos if you don't want them to be seen.
Private.
Then they cannot be seen.
If you notice, as I back up here, this playlist had 3 other videos in it. Hidden. Gotta hide your videos, kids. You unlist them, people can go find them.
Seen.
So, I'm sure Timmy has a lot of other things he's dealing with right now, but you might want to check back in on the old YouTube, bud.
Tech support is probably not at the forefront.
Not at this moment, no. Haha! All right, howdy.
We're back.
So anyway, that was my big stinger for the episode, was finding that video. I was so freaking proud of that. So again, I just wanted to highlight that clip to show that no matter what Tim says about his relationship with Janet, she was absolutely at the highest echelons of his organization. He did not bring her on a small trip to give out a scholarship for an adoption with only about 5 or 6 people if he just didn't care about her or who she was or know anything about her. And I have this weird feeling he might start trying to deny her soon, so we're not going to let him get away with the Judas. But anyway, moving on to the rest of September, everything I could see was the beginnings of Tim starting to do damage control. So this is particularly highlighted by 2 clips that I will show here. The first of which comes to us from Adam Carolla.
Oh, God.
We have that picture ready.
Does someone have it?
Well, I heard it says on my screen it's ready.
I'm not embarrassed by it. I mean, there it is.
Oh dear.
Sorry, Catherine. I mean, look at my eyes. Zoom in on my eyes. I'm completely asleep.
Right.
I'm laying there for hours.
Right.
And the person taking the pictures is Katie, and she's took it and sent it to a few of the operators who and say, hey, keep this archived. So I had to keep going back, and they only last a few days, right?
The henna tattoos.
So I don't know, does that look like I'm doing some kind of a sex pic?
No.
Does that look like a sexy pic I'm sending to someone?
No, but does it look a little like Hunter Biden at his worst? A little bit, just shades. So yeah, you have a big heart on your right thigh made out of barbed wire. It's the kind of thing that these guys would help.
And that's look, and look at when you're getting the massage, you're doing the treatment. They see this, they're like, this guy's crazy.
That's all we needed. Now I'll be honest.
So unconvinced.
Oh yeah, he knew.
He was like,
and there's no way that man is sleeping. Like if you notice, he's even clenching. Like you're not asleep.
Now, I do have to say, part of the reason I wanted to show you all that clip is, one, because it's hilarious to see the things Tim thought it was okay to send to his volunteers. And we'll be getting into all of that, friends, very, very shortly. But I don't speak Spanish, unfortunately. For our friends at home, fun fact, McKay speaks fluent Spanish.
I do.
And there is a word in Spanish that I can't translate here. I'm going to put it up on screens right over Timmy's happy place. McKay, for the audience at home, can you tell us what that word means in Spanish?
Well, depending on where you are, because dialect really matters when it comes to speaking Spanish. In some places, it would mean to fuck. Derogatory.
Derogatory emphasis.
Yeah.
Just
derogatory.
So essentially what I'm hearing is it's the equivalent of someone getting, like, have sex tattooed in English above their junk. That's what I'm hearing.
That is the infinitive form of
verb.
the verb. Yes, it is to fuck. It is not fucking or let's fuck. It is just to fuck. So it's in some cases having a verb in the infinitive sense, like on a sign or something, no fumar, no smoking, does make sense. In this context, I don't know. It feels a little weird. And not to mention, it looks dumb.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be honest, it looks dumb. There is not a single criminal person in these developing countries that would be impressed or even kind of tricked, in my opinion, by these tattoos into
You mean they're
making
not
them
thinking
think
he's such a badass?
Yeah,
for that?
no, absolutely not. Because you just look at prisons that have like MS gang members or 18 members. These guys are like, their faces are covered with tattoos. The whites of their eyes are tattooed, and it's just extreme.
So I say all of this because we're about to lead into talking about why Tim was dressing like this. But I want you all to keep in mind the grace with which Tim went undercover. Because I feel like we all can see the scene before this henna tattoo was put in place of him Google translating, English to Spanish. Fuck.
Yeah.
Just to make sure he had the spelling right, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you for that, McKay. For those of us who don't speak
You're
Spanish, that's very helpful. So, all of that leads us into October of 2023, where I would say the biggest single development in the entire case took place. Namely, the filing of a massive lawsuit, civil suit, particularly at this time, against Tim Ballard for sexual harassment, grooming, a variety of charges. Hello again. So I just want to take a second to really dig into a little bit more detail regarding the civil suit that was filed against Tim Ballard and give you an idea of some of the charges that he's facing from this suit. And specifically, I want to highlight that this article from ABC4 in Salt Lake City from Megan Brugger and Megan Pickett was basically the foundation for my knowledge of this situation, and is what I'm going to kind of be reading from here to explain it to you all. But essentially, this article details the charges that are laid out against Tim in the civil suit, which include sexual assault and battery of women volunteering for and employed by OUR, conspiracy to commit said battery and sexual assault by Tim Ballard and people connected to OUR, fraud by Tim Ballard, civil conspiracy by Tim Ballard regarding defrauding all the victims, the intentional infliction of emotional distress on all victims, inciting outrage against the plaintiffs by Tim Ballard and parties related to OUR, and so forth and so on. So yeah, I'm not going to dig into the rest of the charges on there. You can go look at the article for yourself. It's more procedural towards the end. But suffice it to say that 5 women who had worked with or volunteered with OUR in some capacity in the past are suing both Tim and the organization for his gross, improper, inappropriate sexual behavior towards them, specifically relating a lot to what took place during the couple's ruse, but also in a variety of other situations where it appears Tim was inappropriate and that people in OUR and other organizations affiliated with them were working to make sure that he was avoiding the consequences for that inappropriate behavior. So I wanted to take a second before we jump into this section too much just to make absolutely sure everyone understands what the couple's ruse is. When I was watching my editing back, it didn't totally come across to me, so I'm going to make sure it makes sense. So, Tim Ballard likes to claim that as part of his sting operations, finding kids and doing quote-unquote human trafficking or whatever he claims to do, that he has to build trust with some pretty bad people, some traffickers. And in order to do that, he has to participate in front of them in some pretty illicit activity. I'm not going to get into the specifics. You can probably figure it out. Well, according to Tim, the couple's ruse allowed OUR's operators, like himself, to build that trust with those traffickers while also having a viable excuse for not participating in a lot of different activities. Essentially, Tim and a trained volunteer fake girlfriend, wife, quote-unquote girlfriend-wife person, most importantly, would accompany Tim and sort of suggestively participate in sexual-like activities with him. That's a big part of the whole lawsuit and all the controversy, but with the goal being to not participate in any of the particularly disgusting things the traffickers were looking for, while still convincing them of one's pervertedness, I suppose. I think it's one of those things that really appeals to the action movie view of human trafficking that Tim likes to cultivate. And from the research I've read, this is not the type of thing that would be involved in a lot of anti-human trafficking work at all. And as we'll all come to find out throughout the course of the video, the more we find out about Tim Ballard and how this thing was deployed, the more it just seems like a disgusting scam to help Tim Ballard get into close proximity with women he could manipulate and abuse. Do you all want to explain the couple's ruse real quick, or otherwise I'll just voice it over?
Take it if you want to.
But it's a doozy, and we have to talk about it to understand Tim Ballard and why he's where he is today.
Well, it is, and it's like, I mean, it's like, it reminds me of like the dudes that I would date in like high school and college that would like propose like weird scenarios where it was like, it's okay because like it's raining outside and the clouds are shaped like a turkey, and that means that because of that we can do this. It's like he's created this like perfect scenario where it's like, well, within these bounds we can violate the law of chastity. Like only in this time you get the like amazing opportunity to pretend to have chemistry with me, and like it sells it as like this like great opportunity, and apparently gets it endorsed by apostles. But in reality, it's like, to me, it's no different than like trying to justify soaking. We know what you're trying to do, but this doesn't get us anywhere. And it's also like, I don't know, from a like ethical standpoint, is also just really gross to me. Like, it's like, this just seems like a not okay thing to do in any sense, and it like other people working in like legitimate human trafficking, I'm sure, don't go about it this way. But Tim seems to think it's okay.
It seemed to me like the type of thing, and this is a lot of Tim Ballard's brand, I think we can all agree, things that to people who aren't paying attention whatsoever would totally make sense. Well, obviously, because of the 3 mafia movies I've seen, if you want to get in good with the criminals, you have to dress like them and talk like them and act like them. That doesn't, even from just a cursory glance, I'm like, I don't feel like that's how they would do that. I'm not saying I'm the expert. I'm saying Tim's probably not, and I think he's wrong. And so that's really, really strange. Now, you mentioned, Jordan, that part of the whole big controversy on the Mormon side surrounding this was that Tim was reporting very high official backing for this particular practice, this couple's ruse. And just to be clear, the couple's ruse is when Tim would pretend to get weird or frisky to a volunteer he was fake married to on a sting operation to try and convince the traffickers that he was as perverse as they were. It's very strange and ill-defined. That's the best I've got, to be honest.
Going undercover to find children is wading through a sewer. These children are found in places like strip clubs, brothels, dirty spas, places where high-end escorts are controlling the situations, traffickers. So if I am a man or one of my operators walks into one of these places and is approached by a trafficker trying to put a child to service on that person, or a sex worker, and that man, now you think about this, and that man, that operator doesn't partake of what's being offered, they lose credibility, they're kicked out of the place, and no one's going to get rescued. And so we came up with a concept that we call the couple's ruse, or the couple's tactic, where you go in together, pretending to be a husband or wife or boyfriend, girlfriend. Now you go in, and one of you could pretend that, yes, I want to partake in this sex act with this woman or this child, but I can't because my girlfriend won't let me, but maybe we can do it later. So the trafficker sees the situation, recognizes that I have every excuse not to partake, and he won't kick me out. And now I have the opportunity to build rapport, to get more intel, to dig deeper. But it hurts. It beats you up. I just listened to my wife on Ron Arquette last night, and I cried. I'm grateful to tell you that we draw lines. We have rules, very specific rules, so we keep our morality and my faith, keep my covenants that I made with my wife. And I have.
So Tim would claim that the president of the Quorum of the 12, yes, I did have to ask McKay right before this take how to say that again, M. Russell Ballard, Tim would claim that he officially signed off on this practice. And that would in fact be one of Tim's primary recruiting strategies to encourage these young women to partake in this, was that, one of your LDS higher-ups is totally cool with it, verified every single step of the process, and people believed him. So that actually would end up, according to this civil suit, leading to Tim's excommunication from the LDS Church. Now, I wanted to talk to you all very particularly. This is one of the sections that I really struggled with, because in my research, I could not actually find full verification of his expulsion from the church. And I realized about halfway through, I didn't even necessarily know what that would look like, even if I saw it. Hey, just want to check in real quick. Now, I know we highlight this Daily Mail leak here, but I do want to mention it, even though I hate the Daily Mail, because as you'll see here, and as far as I can tell, they're the only people that got this. They do seem to have a screenshot of some sort of internal document from the LDS Church that highlights Catherine Ballard as the head of household and leaves Tim off entirely, giving a lot of credence to the excommunication theory, even though we don't have any official confirmation of that. However, this is the Daily Mail, a conservative gossip rag that I doubt acquired this particular document ethically or in any capacity that would be considered reasonable. So take all that for what it's worth. I wanted to explain this because if you Google Tim Ballard excommunication, this article is almost invariably the first one to come up, and they do have a piece of information, whether they got it through inappropriate channels or not, that nobody else has. So I just felt the need to discuss this real quick. I know I saw a Daily Mail leak, which I don't like to use the Daily Mail, but they had a leak of church documents that had him not listed in the family. Hi, Jen. No, I fed them already.
When did you feed them?
Like 7.
I just fed them again.
They hungry boys.
Nice. Is that a yellow Dickies cup?
It is. I'm very
Want me to
sweaty.
open a window?
Yeah, that would probably be helpful. I've got this little fan too. Oh, Jen, look at the screen.
What?
Yellow Dickies cup gang.
Wow.
We all dicking it tonight. This has been wild. We've been having so much fun.
I literally painted the ceiling. I got on the step ladder.
This is
painted
how
the fucking
codependent
ceiling.
we are. When we're not hanging out and she doesn't have access to The Sims, this is what happens.
I just got my
Don't
world
worry.
done. I just got all my lots set up.
Yeah, she's been making this new world for like a week now. Thank you for
You're fine.
weathering us getting off track. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Mormon excommunication because I realized it was more complicated than I thought it would be. I assumed that they would, I don't know, a press conference or,
Yeah.
and then I realized like, they probably aren't like having like, the high noon announcement of all the people we kicked out. So can you
They
all...
used to.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, well, I'm just going to ask my question then. Can you all explain maybe the process of Mormon excommunication to us a little bit? And also explain how likely, if at all, is it that we will ever get formal confirmation of Tim's excommunication?
Well, the process can be rather lengthy depending on what is going on, because anybody can be excommunicated from just your average Joe to the most heinous criminals, i.e. Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell.
We never got official confirmation for Lori, but we did for Chad.
But yeah, it very seldom does the church ever make an announcement. And if they do, it is almost always to cover their asses in some sort of way. With Chad, it particularly was the fact that he was a murderer of multiple people, and he's now sitting on death row. In the past, it has been, her name escapes me, the ordained women.
Kate Kelly.
In the past, it was Kate Kelly, who did not commit any sort of crime, but was excommunicated for apostasy because she was the leader of the ordained women movement within the church, who were fighting to have women ordained with the priesthood, which is exclusive to men.
So it's very political because they were trying to make a statement like, you can't join this movement. If you join this movement, you're going to get excommunicated. You're going to get in trouble.
It's apostasy.
So it's very intentional how they use the excommunication.
So essentially, apostasy is one of the things that can lead to your excommunication or your disfellowship from the church, which is not total separation, but you are not allowed to attend church or whatever your council decides. So essentially, what happens is you commit a sin that the church deems to be too grievous for you to repent of by yourself or with your bishop, but needs to be elevated to the high council of the stake. Or you are viewing pornographic material and attending to yourself, you would talk to your bishop. But once you get into like the adultery kind of thing where, or you've committed a crime, now we have to go to the high council, who is, it's kind of set up like the quorum of the 12 apostles. It's headed up by the stake president and his counselors, and then there are 12 on the
Men.
High Council who essentially you go in front of, and colloquially we call it in the ex-Mormon space a court of love, because you essentially go up and they state what is known and the sins that they are aware of, and you have an opportunity to speak and defend yourself. And
you can bring witnesses, like you can bring character witnesses for yourself to try to like plead your case.
With how high stakes a lot of this stuff in the Mormon church is, I'm expecting some of these end up looking like real trials. Like people are probably bringing full scale numbers of witnesses and going back and forth. So this is incredible.
Absolutely. So essentially the idea is to have them determine the way for that you need to repent of these sins. And if the sins are grievous enough, then they decide to excommunicate you, which means removing all of your built up progress within the church, from baptism all the way up through your temple endowment and your sealing. All of your priesthood offices are stripped away from you and everything, and you have to start from zero. And usually that means that once you're excommunicated, if you are intent on being back to church or coming back to church, it's a whole process of getting rebaptized and going through all of those things again to prove your contrite spirit and, actually working toward making up for those sins and things like that. So there are few things that are required to bring people in front of a court of love for. Murder is one of them.
Yes.
And there are a couple other things, lesser things, but like things like sexual assault of another adult is not required. It is optional, or things of that matter. Luckily, sexual assault of a child is required, but you know how that works within Mormonism and the
so it's all their rules. Like they have their own rule book that they play by, and it's like I think they're much more locked down about it than they used to be. Like they don't even allow you to record it anymore because people were recording it and posting it online.
When Natasha Helfer was excommunicated because she is a Mormon sex therapist and she is against a lot of the teachings regarding purity and sexual purity and stuff like that, she was going to record it and she was intent on recording it, and they said, we are going to confiscate your phone before we proceed, or we will proceed without you. And she was not going to allow them to have her phone while she's doing this and record. So they proceeded without her and they excommunicated her. So usually if you're getting a court of love, then you could probably guess where it's going to be, because at that point it's just a formality.
I mean, you're in trouble. But the likelihood of that ever reaching the public sphere and like what we've seen in recent years seems to be like much less rare. Like they used to, like when Mormons like ran Utah, like way back in the day, they used to publish the excommunication names in the paper.
Or even over the pulpit.
Or even read them out.
Obviously,
and
they would do the same with mission callings.
Well, they don't do that, and now you don't hear about it as often. But because of what Tim's doing now, I feel like he's miffed enough that's what happened.
And like technically this is a private affair.
Yeah.
And if they had notified Tim, hey, we're going to be holding a hearing, disciplinary council, and you're invited to come and defend yourself, and he is seemingly of the notion that he has done no wrong, or he is trying to keep up appearances at least. So if that was the case, they likely held it without him. They didn't make anything public, especially with the just absolute wasp's nest that could be poked. They would have just done it quietly, excommunicated him, not said anything. He's not said anything because he doesn't believe that he's done anything wrong.
He's embarrassed.
It's embarrassing. Like you have the whole of the Mormon public in the palm of your hand, to the point where you could just meet some woman at the gym and say, hey, do you want to go do a jump with me? And also pretend to be my wife and fellow child abuser. Like, it's really crazy.
Wow.
The way it plays out.
Well, it seems to me like the way you talk about it, and I mean, some of it's intuitive. You get in trouble, you run the risk of excommunication. It does also kind of have that orderly Mormon feel to it. There's a trial, there's a court, everything's bureaucratic. That's kind of the rule I've learned with Mormonism. Anywhere we can fit more bureaucracy, we're going to shove bureaucracy into places it doesn't make sense. But I highlight that to say that it seems to me like one can get excommunicated for one of two primary reasons. And you all can agree with this or not, but one I would say is egregious things that make total sense. Murder, abuse, the things you would expect, the criminal ones. And the other one is you made us look bad.
Absolutely.
And you didn't do anything wrong. You just made us look foolish, or you disagreed with us, and we don't like that. And I say that because this is a moment where I think the church could have done this for either reason. I suspect Tim got lumped into the you made us look bad category. And generally speaking, that's what I want people to take away from this. I saw some people referencing in comment sections about, like, see, the Mormons want to kick him out because he's doing all this bad stuff. No, he made him look bad. If he hadn't gotten caught, he would still be LDS through and through, and they'd be happy to have him.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, if he hadn't spoken so candidly about M. Russell Ballard, I think, because the kind of thing that really sparked a whole lot of discussion about it, even to the point where Glenn fucking Beck was going, "This is not my church," was them making a statement that the close nature of the relationship that Tim had mentioned having with M. Russell Ballard was not what he was portraying it to be.
Yeah.
Basically distancing themselves
Well,
from
they have
that
to set
narrative.
the record straight. They have to be like, you can't invoke the name of an apostle. Like, you don't get to do that. And if you do that in any sense, you're going to get in trouble.
So that, to me, like, while it wasn't an announcement that they had excommunicated him, it was basically like all right, here's what we're saying about it. Now all the lower level people, you need to get to work and fix this.
Yeah.
And get him excommunicated, because
so he'll stop talking.
It's basically the decree of the king.
And it sounds to me like we're not going to get any official message about this from either party unless Tim starts going renegade again. That's the one thing I would say is if he claims to be Mormon and he's not, I assume we could expect an official response then of, you made us publish the excommunication paper, here it is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think he's learned his lesson on that. And if he wants any sort of relevance going forward, he would really think twice about invoking his Mormon roots.
Well, I think that's why I think he's understanding now that his best course of action is to shift.
Yes.
Like,
and we'll talk about that later on, but because this is all going to become relevant later for Timmy's most recent endeavors. But I say all of that to highlight that, number one, the church was just covering its own butt, and I don't want anyone thinking that this was an altruistic or a positive gesture on their part. They were covering themselves, and they were covering their dead guy. And likewise, I know that all of that we have right now in terms of his excommunication comes out of the civil suit, save for a single leak that I have found from, like I mentioned, the Daily Mail, who I tend to not credit much anyway. They seem to pull some sort of internal church record.
Well,
I
and
don't know.
they would not be able to have, they would never have access to that if it was not for somebody being in his ward sending that to them.
Yeah.
So if obviously Daily Mail credibility comes into play, but I feel like that would be, they would not be able to obtain without somebody who is
somebody in the ward.
around there.
Yeah. And speaking of that civil suit, because again, that's where almost all of the excommunication stuff comes from at this point. Just some other quick highlights for everyone based on, and I'll be honest, I used your all's video discussing the initial lawsuit. So I'm going to read down the highlights. Feel free to add anything you want. But some of the additional embarrassing, disgusting behaviors Tim was accused of in this suit include things like telling his couples ruse cohorts that they needed to practice their chemistry in order to build the right kinds of pheromones. Taking his son, who had just come back from a mission, as I recall, to the strip club.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't been on a Mormon mission, but I know you have, McKay. I'm assuming it would have been a bit of a shell shock to come back and then, hey, bud, great to see you.
I remember ribbing my sort of newlywed brother for not attending church very often.
Let alone going to the strip club.
Yeah,
There
I
you
don't
go.
think
Dad of all people.
Yes. Well, but he's also I wrote down, and in quotes I put, spit the booze in my mouth, which I believe was a reference to him saying that he could, like, snowball alcohol to himself to get it away from these women. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Just so we're all clear. And then again, I wrote down
Don't
Russell
just
Ballard.
spit it out in the trash can. You have to come over here and fucking penguin it to me.
Yeah. And I'm sure he's not. I cannot imagine Tim is then waddling over to a trash can. I think Tim wanted to save money on that Jack Daniels shot, but I'm not here to judge. And of course I am here to judge. Never mind. That's gross. And then not only that, but also, M. Russell Ballard giving total permission for all of this. Again, this is the type of stuff he was saying that this high-ranking Mormon was signing off on.
I'm supposed to spit it out. But no way, Jose, am I spitting this stuff out? It tastes like fruit.
And then I also wrote down, and this is actually just for me, I wrote down the second anointing. Can you explain that just in a little bit of detail?
Yes, it's what essentially broke my shelf with Mormonism, but it's basically this idea that the apostles, like the church leaderships, will select certain people, and the atonement essentially doesn't apply to you anymore because you get this special little ceremony that essentially says no matter what you do, you're fine. So it doesn't matter if you kill somebody, doesn't matter if you cheat on your wife, doesn't matter what you do, like you have a guaranteed spot in the celestial kingdom no matter what.
They're literally like made men in the mafia. It's a made man. That's all it is.
Yeah, and the ceremony is very special. You go into the temple, which not every temple is equipped to do this.
There's a special room.
Sunday, which the temple is closed on Sundays, and an apostle comes and he washes your feet and blesses you and makes your calling and election made sure. It is super, super top notch, super niche. It used to be common among basically all the old membership up until about the 1920s when they started to stop doing that, especially after the Reed Smoot hearing in the U.S. Was it the Congress? I don't remember what it was.
Regular members will never hear about this. If you are just a run-of-the-mill member, the odds of you finding out about this is slim to none because they don't teach it.
No, if you are not a rich member, you will probably never hear about it. If you are rich, then that's a different story.
Yeah, I can see. I didn't even have a Mormon shelf, and I feel like I just put one up so I could hit it with a hammer.
Yeah.
Like, that's good Lord.
You dropped a bowling ball on the plywood shelf.
That was the final. The final straw. And
I'm like Mr. Krabs. I hired them just to fire them again.
Yeah. Well, and it's like that's kind of the sketchiness about it is it's allegedly given to like not necessarily the influencers, but like people like Mitt Romney would be probably a person who's definitely had like his second anointing. Like it's the special Mormons who are going to get that privilege.
I can also foresee that being important for people people who are going into positions of high power and dubious ethics, like what Tim Ballard was doing or being president, maybe.
Absolutely.
That would make sense. And so all of that I want to highlight to everyone was October of last year. All of that happened in October. Okay. Now moving into November, from what I saw, things were still going somewhat manageably for Tim. He was still getting name dropped by Donald Trump even at this point.
I will also use Title 42 to end the child trafficking crisis by returning all trafficked children to their families in their home countries immediately, back to their parents, where they were stolen from their parents. You saw the movie Freedom. They were stolen from their parents.
Now, one thing I will say that I thought was really interesting here was that in November of last year, the civil suit plaintiffs who were initially anonymous, several of them came forward and made their own statements. They released their identities to the public, taking a lot of the wind out of Tim Ballard's sails and making it a lot harder for him to say they're just attacking him from the shadows. So I want to highlight that the actions and words of these brave women are the reason we're taking this creep down. And I think that's really important to highlight.
It's humiliating to share the most mortifying moments of my life publicly.
5 women and one of their husbands speaking publicly for the first time, outlining the details of what they say happened in their own words.
How many more women have to come forward for this to be taken seriously?
The 5 women all say they took part with Ballard or a different OUR employee in a so-called couples ruse, a tactic Ballard has described as being necessary to fool sex traffickers. But in lawsuits, the women allege that the practice ultimately led to things like lap dances, showering together, and sexual assault. The group says seeing Ballard publicly deny the allegations and his organization make statements that they believe discredit them is hard to hear.
It's very infuriating. It's triggering.
The group claims that the board of OUR protected Ballard when the women reported that they had been sexually assaulted, and they believe that OUR was misleading donors and the public as well.
it was obvious I could be manipulated because of how much I cared.
This was also the month where we would see that things wouldn't stay in civil court either, with the first of Tim's accusers taking her complaints to criminal court and filing with her police department. So as of right now, I believe he has about 7 active criminal investigations going on. This was the first one. So let's bear that in mind. Again, thank you for their bravery. And then this is the one I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about. Have you seen this expose from The Blaze?
No. Hold on.
In my opinion, this is one of the worst things to happen to Tim, at least from my research in doing this, when The Blaze of all organizations posted a scathing expose on Janet Rousson.
Oh.
Now, for our viewers who aren't aware, The Blaze is owned by Mormon convert and extremely close, well-known buddy of Tim Ballard's, Glenn Beck. Has something, do you all know, has something happened in their friendship? Has something gone on that, because I know that Glenn Beck is still the CEO of Blaze, and I assume that he would have the ability to shelve articles if he wanted. Do you all have any idea why this might have gone through?
I think that Glenn probably flipped because immediately following the statement made by the church about Tim and M. Russell Ballard's relationship, he was very defensive.
Yeah.
And I remember him getting on and talking about how this is not his church. He doesn't know what's going on. And then a few days later, he had walked it back. And after he had said, I'm just paraphrasing, after examining things that had been brought up and things
I'm
he
sure
was
he
not
got
so
a call
sure
from an
about it.
apostle
I'm
that
sure.
was like, let me fill you in, Glenn. Because Mormon leadership is very fixated on like who they have in media and their roles and like perpetuating the Mormon message even in a not obvious way. And so I could easily see them wanting to cater to Glenn and being like, no, like let us explain it to you so understand, because we don't want to lose you to this.
So what you're telling me, it's because this is why I asked this question. This is fascinating to me because what I'm hearing is, at least from your suspicion, that they might have made a phone call to protect Glenn from what was about to come out. Basically saying, hey, bud, don't tie your reputation to Tim. Don't do that. We need you.
Don't go down with the ship.
I suspect that is probably what happened because I mean, they don't want their people in the media, especially with like The Blaze. I have family who are longtime listeners before The Blaze was even created, and to this day are listeners of Glenn Beck. So they know that he has a lot of pull. So they wanted to keep things in check and be like, hey, let's keep you in the loop so that we don't have another road
don't follow Tim down the
I'm
thread.
sure it was damage control.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, James in editing here again. So I wanted to kind of summarize some of what I saw in this Blaze piece from November 2023 covering Janet Rousson. Specifically, there are 3 takeaways from this article that I think are really relevant to the story we already know and where the story is going. Number 1, that Janet Rousson would predict, quote unquote, for Tim and OUR's raids without any evidence whatsoever beyond her own feelings about what she was communicating with various spirits or Mormon entities. And of course, when she was predicting Gardy's location like that, she inevitably ended up being wrong every single time, wasting the Mardy family's time, resources, and energy all along the way. Janet would also provide strangely complex and detailed reports of supposed psychic interactions she was having with Gardy in what seems like some sort of twisted attempt to preserve their hope and engagement with the cause. And perhaps most disturbingly, she would even convince the Mardy family to give back to OUR, specifically by encouraging them to sell the jewelry of Gesno Mardy's deceased mother, who, bear in mind, died in the same earthquake that made Gardy's rescue nearly impossible, it seems, and to then give that money back to OUR to help with their supposed child-saving efforts. So yeah, absolutely super duper duper gross on their part, and a really icky part of this whole thing. But I don't know if you all actually have read this expose either. It's fascinating. Do when you get the chance. The biggest revelation out of this I wanted to highlight was that in this expose, it was revealed that Janet Rousson may have convinced Gesno Mardy to sell his deceased mother's jewelry and donate the proceeds directly to OUR.
Wow.
Oh,
that is
God.
Cold, callous, and profiteering. And speaking of Janet Rousson, in December of 2023, she would finally strike out on her own in a podcast interview with one, I'm not going to call him a gentleman, but he's some guy by the name of Troy Abels. You all know Troy Abels. He seems to know you.
Unfortunately.
So that's how the Matthiases, that's how John DeLynn, and that's how these other podcasters such as this Jordan and McKay couple who looked so happy when they had the light of Christ and the Holy Ghost.
Would you like to tell him anything? Because I get the vibe he might be watching.
Well, I mean, I feel bad saying this, but I did not know who he was. And then somebody sent us the video and said like, oh, he like said you guys are ugly or like fat or some shit. I was like, oh,
Did they even send it to us, or
somebody
wasn't it
commented.
Carly who?
Somebody said that you guys, he mentioned the video.
You looked better when you had the light of Jesus, is what I recall he said.
I was like, okay, buddy, just say I'm fucking fat.
I
Like,
had a
just
kid.
be
I mean,
real.
what do you want?
We say that because we don't like this guy very much, and this interview was completely bonkers. I listened to all of it. It's wild. I'm gonna just read from you a couple of my notes. I don't know if you all read the entire thing. I was kind of hoping not, just to spare yourself. So this is also where I found out, for example, that like Tim Ballard, Janet also has 9 children. Now now she has 6 adopted children compared to Tim's 2. To kind of give you an idea of how invested she is in that particular side of life, I found out she reached out to Troy Abels. They both confirmed. He did not set the interview up. She set the interview up. So I thought that was interesting. They got a sponsorship from Little Debbie Ice Cream. This was just a complaint from me, and I don't know if it was on Spotify, but I'm annoyed because they've never called me and I could sell that product way better. Like,
we've seen your ads.
Well, and
You could do it way better.
Little Debbie
magic.
Ice Cream. It's just the ad's just 90 seconds of me finishing an entire pint. Like I can do this. Put me in, coach. She did note that she is still donating money to OUR. So at least as of December, she was still giving them money.
Wonderful.
They all really assumed that it was tied to his Senate run. The allegations were tied to his Senate run, which is a big part of the whole conspiracy with Tim, that it has to do with that Senate run we were talking about earlier. Although I think that we're ignoring a bit of when someone's profile increases, they tend to have more people trying to stop it if they've done something wrong. But,
Yep.
What do I know? Let's see. Lots of victim blaming. I do think it's interesting she noted that, so they had 5 women suing him who were participants in the couples ruse. But she was very particular to note that there were about 20 women overall who participated in it. That means 25% of the women who participated are suing him, according to your math. That's
1/5.
terrible. That's a bad record. 1 out of 4 suing you is bad. Stop that.
Sure that there's others, but they don't want to deal with the shitstorm that comes when you put yourself out there like that.
And then my favorite one, this was late into it, an hour and 40 minutes into this shitfest. They both pretended to, or I'm going to say pretended because I feel like y'all laugh at this. At least they claimed, both of them, to not know who Ruby Frankie was.
Girl, you're a fucking psychic. What?
And I'll have to listen to it back. I could be wrong about this. I'm pretty sure Troy pronounced her name correctly and then went back and mispronounced it. So I'm not sure. I'll check.
You would never pronounce it correctly unless you had heard it before.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and it was all over the news.
You've got people like John DeLynn making these weird connections. You have Radio Free Mormon. Some of you don't know who these people are. That's the name of the podcast. They talk about you guys endlessly. They connect you with the Frankie, Ruby Frank.
Oh, wait a minute. I know who you mean. Down in southern Utah, the mom.
Yeah, the Frankie case. I don't know if it's Frankie or Frank.
Yeah.
And the Hildebrandt.
I was going to ask. I just wanted to see from your opinion, living in that region, how likely would you, scale of 1 to 10, is it possible for someone to not know who Ruby Frankie is in December of 2023 as a Mormon living in Utah?
Not possible.
If you live under a rock, maybe.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure. Thought I was on the ball with that. In the meantime, we had a couple other things happen in December that I thought were interesting. One thing I will note, I don't know if you all knew, that was when OUR posted their first major public statement saying that they were moving on from Tim. They particularly minimized his role and stated that he did not attend as many raids as he claimed he did. I don't know who to believe here. It's hilarious to me, though. We also know that at this time, his wife, Catherine, was added to the civil suit. She was added as a defendant in December. And this is also when, in my opinion, he got his biggest rebuke, when Attorney General Sean Reyes, who we mentioned before, basically acted like the entire Roman Senate on Caesar all by himself and stuck as many knives as he possibly could in Tim's back, specifically stating that he would not be running for re-election, that he believed Tim's accusers, that he would be opening an investigation into that while also recusing himself from said investigation. And I've never seen someone jump ship harder in my life.
Hello, I'm Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes, and for 10 years I've stood watch over this state, defending our laws, lives, and liberties, protecting our teens from street drugs, vaping, sextortion, and suicide. With the filing deadline in Utah just 1 month away, I wanted to be clear. I will serve my current term as AG throughout 2024, but will not be running for re-election. I do believe I would win, but winning another election would keep me from even more important personal priorities. There's one more important issue I want to address that weighed into my decision. Recently, several of the women who brought civil sexual assault and other claims against Tim Ballard and OUR came forward publicly, disclosing their identities. I thought it was brave, as I knew they risked shaming and retaliation. After hearing their stories in person, I believe them. And I'm heartbroken for what they've endured and the trauma that they will face their entire lives. I apologized to each of them that my past friendship with Tim Ballard and strong association with OUR contributed to an environment that made them feel powerless and without a voice to fight back for many years. I cannot give them back those voiceless years, but I intend on spending my last year in office working together with these survivors and any others who come forward so that their voices are heard and they have access to resources and support. I will work to integrate them into a task force or create one so they have a safe way to support survivors and prevent what happened to them from occurring to others. Separate from my own work with them, they have now contacted the Utah Attorney General's Office, or AGO, to request a criminal investigation into their claims. I am now recused, meaning I will have no involvement, but my office will conduct a statewide investigation of Tim Ballard, Operation Underground Railroad, the Spear Fund, or others to determine what criminal conduct occurred, if any, relating to the complaints made.
For his credit, Tim did at this point try firing back, filing a motion with the civil suit to strike several pieces of evidence, saying that they were acquired illegally. I think it's interesting just that that's kind of all he's got, and all he can go on is procedural right now. So moving into the new year, January, this is when Tim would receive 4 new criminal charges, and by the end of the month, he would be up to the total of 7, which I believe he's still at now. Furthermore, we also got a lot more information out of some new filings in the civil suit about Tim's specific discipline with the LDS Church. Hey, James in editing again. So I wanted to let you all know that specifically the discipline that's being talked about in this article that Tim got from the LDS Church has to do with a letter that civil suit plaintiff Celeste Boris acquired for Tim, a letter of good standing from his LDS bishop at the time. However, once more information came to light about Tim's behavior, the LDS bishop in question rescinded that letter and would no longer allow Tim to say that he was in good standing with his parish or with his church, which was the discipline being discussed here. February would see Sound of Freedom finally coming back into the public consciousness, although probably not in the way they want, considering it was a lawsuit filed by Kelly Johanna Suarez Moya of Colombia. I hope I pronounced that right. Don't correct me and hurt my feelings, McKay. And her mother, whose name I didn't put here, for allegedly modeling the villain of Sound of Freedom after her. I will say, she looks a lot like her. I've seen Sound of Freedom. She does look an awful lot like her, and the backstories match. And I don't know. I mean, Tim's claiming it's a cash grab, of course. Tim and his team are saying it's just a cash grab. But right now, I trust basically anybody on Earth more than Tim Ballard, so that's my opinion. And then our buddy Troy Abels strikes back on his own with Unfounded. Hey everybody, James in editing here. So I just wanted to make sure I explained exactly what this Unfounded thing was. It's what I would call a fan-made documentary. It's made by this Mormon fanboy of Tim's named Troy Abels, and it specifically details some of the charges and accusations Tim is facing, albeit from an extremely pro-Tim Ballard perspective, that asserts all of these charges are false and being made in order to try and stop Tim's fledgling career in politics and his supposed work in the anti-human trafficking sector. Oh, and also to highlight, it says episode 1 right now. That was posted back in February. So far, there hasn't been an episode 2. I suspect we won't have an episode 2 coming, but who knows? But yeah, I just wanted to explain real quick exactly what this whole unfounded thing was. Now let's jump back into my conversation with Jordan and McKay. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I made it about 8 minutes in to where Tim was in his little outfit getting ready for his little fake sting operation before I couldn't take it seriously and gave up. And so I tried to watch your video covering it in great excruciating detail. Excruciating in the best way. Like, it's all excruciating because it's Tim Ballard. But y'all are great. And I made it to 45 minutes into your video where, once again, Tim's in his silly little outfit, and then I just couldn't take any of it seriously.
As an undercover couple, they could go into strip clubs, bars, dirty spas, and to places where child traffickers do business and block for each other, so neither would be expected to engage in sex with children or adults.
Can we get that blown up and thrown on our fucking wall?
Right now.
Why does he look like John Bon Jovi got stung by a fucking stingray in the face?
He does not make any effort to disguise who he is. And so why are you going into this looking like this?
Seriously.
Like, you look like a washed up Dog the Bounty Hunter, and Dog the Bounty Hunter already doesn't look good. So like, what are we doing? Like,
sorry,
to me,
dog,
this
for
is like, I
catching
just want to
strays.
play a role. Like, I want to get the tattoos. I want to play the bad guy, which is like fine. But you don't have to, like, pretend that you're rescuing children in order to do that.
So, could you all maybe give our audience a quick rundown of some of Troy's commentary in Unfounded, the points he's trying to make on behalf of Tim Ballard?
I guess what it boiled down to, and you can go back and watch our stream if you would like. What it boiled down to was these victims, is they would very heavily implying that they are not victims, are exaggerating, making up things. They want to thwart Tim's very noble efforts in saving children from sex trafficking, and that basically, regardless of whatever has been said or whatever has been filed in a court of law, is detracting from not only Tim's mission, but also a hindrance on Tim and his family because of the monetary aspect of having to defend himself and all of these things.
Saying they don't have any money and they need you to help pay for their defense fund.
Talk about a cash grab.
And in the meantime, Tim was at CPAC 2024 building his conservative credibility, particularly hanging out with co-star and producer of Sound of Freedom, Eduardo Vestigui. At this CPAC speech is where Tim would continue the conservative rhetoric he's kind of been known for, specifically calling Biden's border agents a sex trafficking delivery service. So that's his new thing.
Our own agencies on the border, again, not because they want to, because they're being told by the administration, they have become a child sex trafficking delivery service.
Yes.
Wow. Because these kids just show up and they're unaccompanied and they have like a phone number of the sponsor. They have to call the number and they send the kid away. That's how easy it is.
March would make things much worse for both Tim and frenemy Sean Reyes when text messages were leaked, clearly showing them conspiring to help Tim beat charges against OUR. Specifically, I think that was tied to his fraud case back in the day. And then this is the one I was going to mention. So this goes back to what we were talking about with the excommunication and the shiftiness around it, and why people are thinking about this now is because recently Tim has been flirting with the world of tradcath, specifically making some allusions to a possible conversion. I am curious, have you all seen the clip that most people are actually referencing when they talk about his conversion?
I read about it, but I haven't actually seen the clip.
I haven't watched it, no.
It's
But I did know about that.
He is not actually the one that says it. There is a presenter there, and they give him a phony baloney little award. It's adorable. It's some plaque they got. It doesn't matter. But it's actually the presenter who puts the idea out. And so I say that because Tim looks a little put on the spot, but he does not say no. And he does confirm at that time that he's wearing a Saints medallion.
When I was talking to Tim back there just now, leading up to this, he informed me, number one, he walks the walk, talks the talk. As we know, he has nine kids, 2 adopted. Definitely pro-life, but he's also talked to me, spoke to me about he's starting to consider the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. He showed me the proof. Right there, miraculous medal he's wearing, the medal of our Blessed Mother.
I don't know how the LDS would feel about someone wearing the iconography of another religion.
No. Especially a crucifix you could get away with, but anything else would not be. That would be idolatry.
Oh, and then in the meantime, he also just said that I think he said something to the equivalent of Democrats are trying to turn genderqueer kids into quote unquote little sex robots. Little sex robots was the phrase he used. So I just wanted to put that out there because it's gross.
Never before in the history of America has there been a war on children. And I said, you got to expand the argument, take it off the border. Take it to other places too and combine it all so you can see what's happening. It's a spiritual warfare as well. If you don't understand that, you can't understand it. Children are being targeted. Look what they're giving our kids in public schools and calling it sex education. It's pornographic material. They're making our kids little sex robots. And so by the time they're 12 years old, and of course they're messed up and they're confused, and then they say they want to, they want to change, they want to gender mutilate.
We love a moral panic.
Absolutely we do, and God knows nothing else keeps Utah going at this point.
Sex robot, 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 sex robot.
So moving into April, the only thing April and May, I'll say, were a little bit quiet for Tim, at least in my research. He kind of settled down for a second. The only thing I saw was another update, I guess the third installment of Tim and Sean go to prison, hopefully, where apparently Tim at one point is accused in one of these civil suits of making arrangements for Sean Reyes at a luxury, I guess, bar or nightclub in downtown Salt Lake City called Mac's Place. I don't know if you all have ever heard of this.
Never.
They have a hoity-toity, you have to schedule thing when you go to the website. But apparently, Tim made arrangements for Sean to meet some women and some cocaine at Mac's Place.
Nice.
And that was in addition to the $1 million+ in donations that Tim funneled to Sean as part of his reelection efforts and protecting himself from fraud charges. So obviously the women and cocaine are a little more interesting, but the $1 million donations are important too. It's really getting bad for them. That's the important thing. Hey, James in editing here again. So I just wanted to let everybody know this Mac's Place is a little weirder than I originally thought. I went back and looked at it, honestly, to get some screenshots. And it's like a bar, but also like it has penthouses and conference rooms and a full service like barber and grooming area for some reason. And they also want to do like MMA fights there. It's all over their social media. And they're like posing with Utah Jazz players, including Karl Malone, who is a terrible, terrible human being. If you don't know, look it up. I just get the feeling, especially since it's called Mac's Place, like this feels like the plot of an Always Sunny episode, right? Like Mac would think that like, oh, we need Patty's Pub to like appeal to the modern upper class gentleman, but then he'd like get in over his head and find out that they're bringing an attorney general and he has to get cocaine and women. So like, this is the strangest fucking thing. Like I said, May was kind of quiet too. Catherine was dropped from the civil suit. I want to be nice here. They're not going after Catherine directly. I also think, and this is something I think you all might be interested in. Have you been to the OUR website recently?
Not recently.
No,
it's on the page. Click the link. I think you'll be surprised at what it looks like now. And it only changed last month. Or no, in late May. It changed in late May.
Wow, it's colorful.
Yeah, this is way different.
You notice how there's no reference to the Underground Railroad. Now they are going by OUR Rescue.
Oh my God.
You notice, and I thought it's really interesting you said that, McKay, because the color was the first thing I noticed too. I'm like, it's not black and yellow breaking chains now. So I get the vibe that OUR is going to be pivoting hard very soon out of tough guy manly raid sting operations, and I'm guessing more into the like college, let's help the kids type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't think they could be more done with Tim if they tried. And in the meantime, all of the masculine, drive your Hummer into the sex trafficking camp energy is now at Spear Fund, I think he calls it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I thought was interesting though. And I way back to this, that change did happen in late May. So they have very recently rebranded to OUR Rescue. This is a new thing. And moving into last month, June, we did see one piece of the civil case dismissed on procedural grounds. Hey everybody, James in editing again. So I wanted to just explain real quick the 2 charges that were dismissed from the civil suit against Tim, just so you all understand exactly what they were and why they were dismissed. First off, one of the fraud charges was dismissed just based on lack of evidence. It seemed like the judge, just for whatever reason, didn't feel that the evidence presented rose to the level that this charge should move forward. There's not a whole lot on it, it seems like, but that's what happened. And the second one was an injury liability charge that was dismissed. It was specifically dismissed based on the fact that the plaintiff had signed a safety waiver. So it was a technicality that benefited OUR. Tim's strutting around like a pigeon on the chessboard, like he won something. It was procedural, and I just want to highlight that. Additionally, I don't know if you all saw this, Reddit user Hold On Lucy 1, I guess, they found out or posted that apparently, this is another reason I wanted to ask about the excommunication, because they said that Tim was participating in fundraisers at the Mormon stake where he would have been excommunicated from. And that potentially he was partnering with a bishop who would have been directly involved in his excommunication.
Well, the bishop wouldn't be involved in the excommunication because it's at the stake level. But
I mean, he would be involved, but
not in the court of love, at least. I did see this on r/X Mormon, and I thought it was a little fishy. But they do kind of things like that every now and then,
with
like fundraising and stuff. And especially because now there's this big push to do kind of like, I don't know what you would really call it, community outreach with like other faiths and things like that. So
but I
if
wonder
it
if this represents a schism a little bit.
It could.
Of like the people who were like, this is our home ward, we loved him, like we don't care about all this, we support him.
And just because people were involved in excommunicating him does not necessarily mean that they were on board with it, really.
No,
because in my opinion, they were just carrying out the church's will and doing what they had to.
Yeah, leadership said
it doesn't necessarily mean that they are bought into the idea that he's done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the consistent themes that you all explore on your channel so well is the intense culture of conformity that permeates every single corner of Mormon life.
Yeah.
No one's going to stop the excommunication process for Tim, no matter how much they disagree with it. It's going to happen. If the snowball was rolled down the hill by someone that high up, no one's getting in its way. This is not a church where that is encouraged. This is not a church where that benefits you.
A lot of people who are very Mormon, their head is in the sand. They're not going to look at a Vice article at all.
No.
Especially when it's considering their sweetheart, Tim Ballard, committing unspeakable acts. And they don't want to look at these lawsuits or whatever and things like that, because he is this guy who is essentially called of God to help children. And even family members of mine were like, oh, but like it's just trying to,
it's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy against him. Like a lot of people just don't care about the lawsuits, don't care about the evidence, and they just want to go along thinking that he's a good guy still.
James in editing again. So I want to highlight that the American Crime Journal, a website which has closely monitored the entire situation with Tim Ballard, and which I would highly encourage you all to check out. Well, they did get an update regarding the fundraiser for Tim at the Eagle Mountain Cedar Stake. Apparently, according to the people involved, it was not an official event. it was just being hosted at the Eagle Mountain Cedar Stake. It wasn't officially tied to it, and that the person who set it up on Facebook was the person who makes events for the church, and so they used the wrong account by mistake. You can decide whether or not you believe that. Well, I think that's fascinating because exactly like you're talking about, this feels like a bit of a schism. It feels strange because it seems like, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Tim maybe did something, and I'm not trying to give him credit, but his persona is so tied to some people's emotions, even in the church and in that Utah culture, that he may be prompting a little bit more, not active rebellion within the church necessarily, but I can't imagine people hosting an official fundraiser for every excommunicated person. That's a declarative statement of something. I don't know exactly what, and I don't know exactly who it's pointed at, but I think it's really interesting, and I'm going to keep an eye on it. And I will say that Tim reports in June that he had already gotten back to his anti-trafficking work. I mentioned here specifically in Mexico because I assume he's trying to help with Donald Trump's re-election effort, so of course he's going to Mexico, because that's who they want to pin everything on. So, had we recorded this even a couple of days ago, it may have seemed like things were looking up for Tim. As of a couple days prior to this recording, things have taken a very sharp downturn for Tim Ballard. I don't know if anyone
Below
wants
the
to...
belt, even, you might say.
I don't think it's something any of us want to talk about in too much detail, because it's gross. But I'm going to post a headline on the screen right now, and just tell you all that Tim is alleged to have deposited a particular body fluid onto a particular garment of one of the volunteers who sued him. It's very Clinton-esque. If you know what Bill Clinton did, you know what's going on here. And if you don't, look it up. You'll learn two stories all at once. So hopefully this and the DNA evidence that the plaintiff claims to have, stating that she has a 100% DNA match with Tim, I think this could be the end. This to me feels like, if it's true and if it pans out, this is the death knell. Because I even mentioned in my notes, I'm not giving Tim or Bill Clinton any credit in this, but this type of thing took down a president. And I don't think Tim's that smart.
No.
I will say, in your most recent live stream where this popped up in front of all of us, McKay, you brought up a theory that I want to put out there because it seems to me the one thing that Tim might still do to plausibly get himself out of this. Do you remember that at all?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I was like, "Are you?
Right
I'm ready
now,
to do
yes.
it. I'm ready to pounce." And the most clear thing, I'm in the brain of Tim Ballard. So if anybody could do what he does, I guess it's me at this point. But I was like, there's got to be some way that he's going to spin this, because he knows he's so connected with all these people and was looking at running for office. So it just makes sense that he's in the mode of spinning the story, in that he could defend himself by saying she wasn't wearing this. She wasn't even in the room. She was showering or something, and he attended to himself, or something of the sort, in order to pass the blame off and make things seem like they're not as bad. But I can't imagine that ever holding up in court, because I don't think I would want anybody's juices on an article of my clothing without my knowledge ever.
That feels like harassment from basically any angle. And I will say that it seems like the best hope he has here, first of all, thank you for bringing that up, because it was uncomfortably correct to me, and I feel like everyone needs to be aware of it, because I have this weird feeling you're right, and that's what he might do.
Watch out, Janet. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for your job, Janet. Nephi told me.
So hopefully we are seeing, as of a few days ago, the actual end of Mr. Tim Ballard, but time will tell. Yeah, so James in editing again, and I just want to kind of go a little harder on Tim than I did even during the call with Jordan and McKay, and say that this charge he's received, I mean, all of the charges he's received, all of the allegations are disgusting, and from all of the evidence we can see, it seems like plenty of them at least are true. And I want to highlight that this newest situation with Tim and his bodily fluids and the skirt, it is a disgusting act of sexual assault. It's gross, and we laugh to kind of keep from crying in these situations. So I think it's safe to say that we know Tim committed at least a gross act of sexual harassment. It seems more likely to me, at least, that he committed a gross act of sexual assault, and he should be held accountable for those things. So I'm glad we're able to do that in some regards in this video, and I just wanted to go a little bit harder on Tim before we move on. And And in the meantime, we have reached what I would consider the epilogue of our story, and I'm sure I clickbaited this in the title, so I have to at least put something. There was a second party involved in last year's Sound of Freedom storyline that we haven't talked about almost at all, namely Angel Studios, who, unlike Tim, seem to just be quietly continuing to make money and stay out of trouble and not cause any problems. They haven't engaged with Tim's story. There are still Sound of Freedom-esque meetings. I mentioned CPAC, where Eduardo Vestigui did a promotion with Tim, so two people who were in that movie involved with it. But overall, Angel Studios seems to have moved on. And I think that's particularly interesting because of Sound of Hope, their next movie coming out. And I will highlight from my experience, it seems like Angel Studios is moving away from TV. I think that they've learned series are far too expensive. I think my fan theory is they got bitten by The Chosen, and The Chosen's not going to get finished. They did also start the Guild on Angel Studios. I don't know if y'all know. So now you can pay a monthly fee. It's $20, but you get voting access to new projects. You get theatrical releases on streaming, which, I mean, they're going all in on this. So I will never fault the Harmons as business people. I will fault their moral failings for working with people like Tim, but not their business capability.
$20 a month is crazy.
That's steep.
They put the Tuttle twins under it. I'm having internal wars with myself right now because the next episode, it's Ben Carson and he's talking about the epidemic of fatherlessness. I have to see
Ben
this.
Carson
I
talking
have
about
to see it.
fatherlessness.
I have to
Oh
see
my
this episode.
God.
I'm going to give them $20, guys. I'm going to give them $20. But I say all of this to highlight that they are moving more towards movies. They've put out The Shift, they put out Sight, obviously very Christian tinged, very Christian friendly, and that leads to this year's Sound of Hope, a movie that is definitely named to try and evoke Sound of Freedom. Does not deal with the same topics. This movie deals with adoption and the foster care system based on this town called Possum Trot, where a pastor of the town encouraged a lot of people to adopt kids, and several children were adopted.
22 families want to adopt. Whole town wants kids now. That's about right. What's happening with Possum Trot could mean a huge change for the system.
We want the ones that nobody else wants.
Who hurt you, baby? I'm not giving up on you. You can't give up on me either.
Seems like on its face, it could end up being a positive story. That being said, and I'll put a little bit of the trailer up here, and I encourage all of you to watch it too, it definitely has the hallmarks of a Sound of Freedom movie. It's very dramatically cut, lots of sweeping violins, lots of, Jordan, you in particular with your background, lots of gross generalizations of what are very big, very complex social problems being boiled down to Republican-friendly black and white ways of looking at the world. I have a suspicion that the Sound of series is coming. That is my fan theory to leave everyone on. I don't believe this was by accident. I believe Sound of Freedom and Sound of Hope were the first two in a series of overblown Christian retellings of various uplifting stories as the people at Angel Studios see it. So honestly, in my opinion, the whole story of Tim Ballard is about to die, and instead, Angel Studios are the ones to watch because they're still worth over $100 million. They're still making content left, right, and center, and they're still probably going to get your religious grandma to download their service and give them $20 a month soon. So keep your eyes on Angel Studios. I think they rode Tim as far as they needed to, and now that he's not useful, they're on to the next thing.
They shot the horse, but we're looking forward to the Sound of Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, that will be
Shout
interesting.
out.
I think you're probably right.
I get the vibe. I'm waiting for the third one. I think next year we're going to see, I don't know, Sound of Fury, Sound of...
We always know that the second one in a trilogy sucks.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, this is their Empire Strikes Back. I was always a Jedi guy myself. Although, hey, I do want to jump in real quick and let you all know that as of just this week, specifically July 15th of 2024, Angel Studios has gotten some more bad news, which we know thanks to the aforementioned American Crime Journal, specifically in regards to the Moya defamation lawsuit. Now, apparently, Angel Studios filed a motion to try and dismiss the lawsuit, stating that it was a movie, and obviously no one would have thought that that was the same person, that old song and dance. And the judge threw that motion out, allowing the Moya lawsuit to go forward. So screw you, Angel Studios, deal with a consequence for once. Well, anyway, that's the end of my telling of the story. That's Tim Ballard, everything I missed, plus catching us up from last year all the way to today. Jordan, McKay, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. Do you all have any final thoughts on the Tim Ballard story, on Angel Studios, on anything we've talked here today?
I guess my takeaway anytime that we talk about Tim and OUR and all of the branches that this horrific tree has is that they have essentially taken a very noble cause and turned it into something that when people talk about it, I cannot trust that there is anything being done about it, because whatever number of people, victims that Tim and OUR claim that they have saved, I can also in that range include 0 because of the amount of distrust, all of the lies, all of the weird practices, and the just discussing abuses of power that have happened under OUR. It really causes me to wonder about anybody in the space. And that is a really sad thing, because I know that there are children out there who are being exploited, that people are fundraising for and then pocketing the money and taking their recently returned missionaries to strip clubs with. And, you know, it's just really disappointing.
Like, be critical and do your homework around these things, because Tim duped everybody in this. And just because it's a nonprofit doesn't mean that it's not doing sketchy shit in the background either. And so being critical and doing your homework and being patient and kind to yourself if you like, I mean, because it's not a bad thing that people put trust in this organization and put trust in Tim and wanted this to be a good thing and wanted to be helping. And it's just unfortunate that Tim decided to take that and run a really sinister direction. So like, be critical of these people and like do your diligence where you can, but it's all overall just a discouraging situation.
And I will say a big part of the reason I wanted to do this, and just to kind of give all our viewers some, you know, good feelings and understandings of how things changed. Part of the reason I wanted to do this update was because I felt like I went too easy on the guy last time. His story was still developing. Nobody wanted to square up to what could have ended up being a anti-child trafficking hero. Things have changed in the past year. It has become abundantly clear that Tim Ballard is not who we thought he was. It's okay to say that. And I think it's really important, because with every single thing that comes out against him, and, you know, diehard ride or dies, his Janet Rusons of the world, his Troy Abels, they're going to find excuses for everything he's done. But even the things he's admitted to were at best reckless and stupid. At worst, they were actively abusive and disgusting. And either way, they have completely undermined the credibility of any good work OUR may have ever done. I am not surprised that organization has had to completely reinvent themselves from the ground up. I don't even know if it will be enough, quite frankly. Even me doing this full time and being as much of a, you know, raging leftist social critic as I am, I fell for it a little bit. And sometimes people have such a presence and set up their brand in such a way that it can be hard for people who actively are ready to challenge them to do it. So make sure you're revisiting these stories. Make sure you're checking in. Don't be afraid to say you were wrong about someone, like I was about Tim Ballard last year. I went a little hard on him. I should have gone a lot hard on him. So, and hey, before I get out of here, I just want to highlight real quick for everyone that all of this information that we know about Tim Ballard, all of the accountability we've been able to enact in regards to him and OUR and everyone involved in this, we've only been able to do that because of two very important groups of people, and I want to thank both of them now. First is the women who filed the civil and criminal charges against Tim. Without their bravery, not only filing those lawsuits and those charges, but publicly revealing themselves to scrutiny and scorn in the face of all of that, their bravery has potentially allowed us to take down someone who I think would have gone on to, without their intervention, harm a lot more people. It shouldn't have been these women's responsibility, especially with everything they went through, not only at Tim's hands, but the hands of so many other people who should have had their backs. And all I can do is just thank them for what they've done and hope that things get really better for them soon and that they get the justice they deserve. And likewise, I want to thank all of the incredible journalists who have been following this story and tracking Tim down, not letting him hide in the shadows. People like Anna Merlin and Tim Marchman from Vice. People like the folks at American Crime Journal. Hell, and honestly, I hate to do this, but even Courtney Wheel at The Blaze. Like, that was a good article. It revealed a lot of information we didn't have. And you all know I love to highlight the role the American journalist plays in the work that we do here at Fundy Fridays. So once again, I just want to take a moment to thank the women who have filed charges and lawsuits against Tim Ballard for their bravery, and the journalists following this case for their tenacity. Without these two groups of people, it is my belief that we may never have been able to hold Tim accountable for these things that he has done. Whew. Oh, another one in the books, as I like to say. Didn't plan to do an update on Tim Ballard, but when things get that awful that quick, you kind of have to. Thank you all so much for coming along on this journey, as you do on all these little journeys that I take you on. I hope I made it entertaining and informative for you, and I hope that it stings a little less because you got to hear about it from me. Thank you always for watching everything that we do. All of you, we love you so much, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary of the channel. Can't believe it, 5 years we've been doing this now. I do always like to say here that if you like what we do, please take a moment to check out our Patreon or our YouTube memberships. Those folks, the people that give us just a little bit of money each month, they really are the foundation of this whole channel. They allow us to keep Fundy Fridays, our best episodes, free and available to the public, and we cannot thank them enough. We only have 2 tiers on both YouTube and Patreon, $1 or $3. They're exactly the same. They both get you access to our Discord server. They get you access to our weekly watch parties. We like to keep things low cost here. We know that sometimes all you can afford is $1. If you can even afford $1, we've been there, trust us. You don't have to give us anything. That doesn't bother us either, but if you got money burning a hole in your pocket and you want to put it to something good that you enjoy, well, it's there for you. And likewise, we also just put out a whole bunch of new merchandise on our Fourth Wall shop from a bunch of great partner artists. Feel free to take a look at all of that. It's all in there. And you can find all of this at the new fundyfridays.net. That's Fundy Fridays, all one word, lowercase, .net. It has all the links to our socials, our merchandise, our Patreon and YouTube. It also has interviews we've been involved in recently and stuff like that. It's just real cool. So take a look at fundyfridays.net. And once again, as I always like to say, do something kick-ass this weekend. In my opinion, I think you should see a kick-ass movie, because Sound of Freedom sucked ass, and a year later, we should watch good movies. So go watch a good movie. May I suggest Demolition Man? Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. You all have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Have a good night.